My name is
Jenny,
David.
Cora,
Lila,
Laurel,
Jen,
Lisa,
Dino,
Ari,
Kyle.
I was a
Jehovah's Witness,
Jehovah's Witness.
FLDS,
in the Amish church.
the chosen people.
I was a Scientologist.
I grew up a Mooney, a member of the Unification Church.
2x2.
And I am
shunned.
shunned.
Sean.
Shunned.
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 Stunned.
Shunned.
A belated Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to everybody. It's 2026 now. Here we are in early January, and I am sitting down to make this episode. I wanted to discuss with everybody the Jubilee recording that was released back in October. So, for the unfamiliar, the very large YouTube channel Jubilee did an episode featuring ex-Scientologists and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. It was referred to as a middle ground episode. I went last July and I participated in the recording of that episode out in LA. And this was something that was sat on, well, they were editing it and doing everything with it. And then it eventually came out in October. As of today, here we are, January the 3rd, 4th, something like that. It's already flying by. And the episode currently sits at about 460,000 views. So that's certainly a lot of folks who have got to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology through a lens that perhaps they've never heard of it. And while I would love to sit down with everybody who participated on that and to talk again, I think trying to get everybody together would be difficult. Probably like trying to nail Jello to a tree or herd cats, right? So, we all have busy schedules. We're all busy people. But I wanted to do something to create an episode because I wanted to talk about some things that I thought about both after our conversation, after watching the conversation, and then there's a lot of things that I wanted to say in the moment that I just couldn't say. In fact, I'm going to address the one prompt that I was never given an opportunity to say anything about when we originally recorded this. I'm going to go over what it was like, what was going through my head during the interview. I want to do my best to put you in the situation so that you can kind of understand what it was like to be there. I'm going to go through the various prompts and talk about those. I may be fleshing out a few things here and there that I wish I could have spoken about when we did the original recording. And I'm also going to react to some things that I've read in comments or heard personally from people that I've interacted with around this particular episode of Jubilee. Let's start with a little behind the scenes information to kind of set the tone. One thing you have to realize is that these prompts that were given to us with zero advanced preparation. We were reacting in the moment. Also, sometimes we had lots of time to talk about a topic, and then other times we had very little, and there was no rhyme or reason to that on our end. That was strictly a production decision. They have a production schedule that they have to run. Ultimately, we were in studio for 4 to 5 hours, and there's obviously a lot of things that didn't make the final 1 hour episode edit. And we had such a deep well to pull from that it was really just impossible to talk about all the things that could have been talked about in the time allotted, even at the 4 to 5 hours of studio time mark. There's just not enough time to explain, to go into the rich detail that a lot of these topics deserved. Now, right from the jump, I wanted to make the point that there were going to be differences between these two groups as far as some of the severity. Scientology seems to most to take things much farther than Jehovah's Witnesses. But at the end of the day, whether you grow up with an overt narcissist in your family or a covert narcissist in your family, the results are going to look very similar. So although the way it was manifested, the intensity with which things were brought up, particularly regarding Scientology, let's say, where that catches people's attention, especially ex-Jehovah's Witnesses could remember when we're listening to this, we're listening through our known experience and we're hearing their unknown experience to us. So it's going to be new. It's going to stand out. And so that's going to play into the way that we hear this information. But either way, it's like comparing traumas. It's really not that beneficial to say who had it worse, who had it easier. It's really, at the end of the day, it's just how did this affect us? Because even trauma itself is an individualized experience. What traumatizes you might not traumatize me, or vice versa. Trauma is a very individual thing to begin with. Adding to the comparisons that go on, and again, I don't think it's always the healthiest thing, especially if we're using it to say, well, someone's trauma doesn't matter, or someone's trauma is therefore invalid because someone else had it worse, as if that's how the world worked. If that's the case, then there's probably one poor soul on this planet who I guess deserves to feel pain or be traumatized, and the rest of us have no reason to feel any kind of pain or trauma response to what we went through, because it's just about finding that ultimate individual, right? But I think it's worth pointing out as we do, because again, this was a middle ground. It was about finding the areas of overlap between these groups. And look, Scientology, certainly, again, very intense. My heart goes out to everybody who was on the panel with me, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Scientologists. And certainly, I think Scientology psychologically, the way they intensely exploit things is just horrible. And yeah, it's just horrible. But there's one thing that Jehovah's Witnesses have going for them on the trauma side, I guess, that I'm not sure if Scientology has, and we didn't really get to talk about it, because I would like to know if there's any Scientologists or ex-Scientologists who watch this and you want to throw in your 2 cents in the comments. I'd appreciate it. But there's one ultimate cult horror. We think of things like Jonestown, and that's death, right? Now, I can't speak to all the ins and outs of Scientology, but Jehovah's Witnesses literally die for their cult. They died in concentration camps during Nazi Germany. They die in this slow Jonestown of sorts, willingly drinking the flavor aid as they deny themselves potentially life-saving medical treatment using blood transfusions. They also make these decisions for their children, who then end up dying as martyrs for this thing. And I really wish that was something we could have gotten into, because that's kind of the ultimate payments, I think, the ultimate damage, if you will, for going through a cult experience, literally costing you your life or costing the lives of those that you love or were close to in a very real, physical, final way. And I just thought that was worth bringing up. And again, this isn't to say anyone had it worse or better. But again, this is something that I wish we could have talked about in real time. And if anyone, again, any ex-Scientologists want to comment below, I think it might be worth noting that the former Scientologists that we were talking to, if I understood it correctly, were all in the Sea Org, which I guess for Jehovah's Witnesses would be our version of Bethel, or maybe a branch facility. So I think that while their stories were quite extreme in many ways, I think that those of us on the ExJW panel left something on the table, because we couldn't speak to the similar intense workload that was maybe put on people at headquarters at Bethel for Jehovah's Witnesses like they had in their Sea Org. Again, I'm not saying it's the same at all, because Scientology has whole families working there, from what I understand, at times separated from their own children. But I think it would have added something from the side of Jehovah's Witnesses if someone was there that maybe could have spoken to the extreme of serving at headquarters. The workload is impressive on all Jehovah's Witnesses. Every brother and sister is expected to do so much for the cult, whether it's the field ministry, whether it's going to the meetings, denying yourself while living among a world that has things that you would like to participate in. having to work long hours at your job, your low paying job, perhaps because you've been denied educational opportunities and things like that. Certainly, I think Jehovah's Witnesses, by and large, go through a tremendous amount of stress and work. But I think that there is another level, or there is that dedicated level at Bethel where people, beyond just maybe pioneering, which I did at a point, being a ministerial servant or whatever. I think that there's another level there that I wish we also could have spoken to, because I think that that would have been an interesting comparison as well, just to see, again, not trying to score points on one another, trying to see, because a lot of people see it that way, but trying to see how these two groups compared at that highest level of dedication, and what people had to give up in order to maintain that level of, just giving your whole life over to a thing. And now I want to kind of move on and go through some of the various prompts and flesh a few things out here and there. But I also want to address some of the inaccuracies briefly and some of the things said by the JW side. I've had a few people point out some things that, yes, I noticed while I was in studio, but it wasn't my place to correct them there. I think there was definitely a bit of hyperbole used in a few instances. To be fair, I could have used it myself. We're going to talk about that, but I didn't call anyone out there, and I'm not going to call anybody out now. What I'd like to say is this. First, everybody is at their own place in their own healing. To add to that, people were also at different places when they were in the cult. A hurt dog might bite you because it's hurt. Likewise, a person might overstate something because they are hurt. Now, that doesn't mean that what they said was untrue at its core either, just that they might have overstated the breadth of something. Second, you go get mic'd up with a bunch of strangers that you're not allowed to talk to until you meet when the bright lights are on and prompts are being hurled at you, sometimes not in a clear way either, and see how well you do. It's easy to get carried away with so much going on and the pressure to have something to add to a conversation of 8 people under the bright lights, and that can impact the way people might phrase a thing too. Third, I've seen Jehovah's Witnesses in the comments picking at those overstatements and using a single overstatement to discredit everything said by former Jehovah's Witnesses on that program. I'll just say this. If only you Jehovah's Witnesses kept that same energy while looking at your lying, manipulative cult. One slight misrepresentation by an ex-Jehovah's Witness means that everything they say is a lie, but massive lies to your face over and over again by your cult are excused away as new light or just an organization run by imperfect men. Why aren't ex-Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to be imperfect as well? If you can watch this episode of Jubilee and you can't see the devastation caused by people like, you, and all you see is one overstatement or where someone generalized, and you miss everything else that person went through for the group that you serve, that says a lot about you as a human being and how disconnected and detached you really are. If you can see a victim of sexual trauma within your group in front of you, and the only thing you walk away with is that they overstated something and you condemn them for doing so, well, maybe you should be an elder, because I think you'd make a good one. So with that out of the way, let's get into some of these prompts. The first prompt was that my former religion was more of a cult than a faith. I don't think that for most people watching this, I need to elaborate much. You already know. And I jumped right in and spoke up first to establish some of the differences between what makes a cult a cult. Now, I've had a few people notice that I jumped right in. A lot of people see what I do on here and otherwise, and many are actually surprised to learn that I'm an introvert. Being an introvert doesn't mean that I can't speak up or that I hate social interactions. It just means that they drain me rather than giving me energy. In my day-to-day life, if I go hang out with somebody on Saturday, I need Sunday to be very chill and quiet. I can do things with other people one day out of the weekend, but I really need something peaceful on the other day. So with that said, obviously I know how to speak up when I need to or want to. And I didn't drive all the way from the Louisville, Kentucky area over across the country to Los Angeles, California to sit on my hands and be quiet. From the time I was invited to apply to be a part of this experience, I was fired up. This was a chance to speak the truth about the truth to people that may never otherwise hear of it, and to make, hopefully, to make ex-Jehovah's Witnesses feel seen and heard and validated. So you're damn right I'm going to speak up. I also know that I talk about this stuff literally every day. I work 5 days a week, full-time in my recovery practice for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Heck, sometimes I work with people that are still very mentally in. I also go help on Reddit and answer private messages and emails and things like that on Facebook and other social media platforms. I do my podcast. I do my YouTube channel. I speak at conferences and other times for groups like the International Cultic Studies Association. So this is top of mind for me. In fact, I even prepped a bit by going back and listening to episode 83 of my own show, the Shun Podcast, where I interviewed Laurel, a former Scientologist. So it's almost second nature for me to be able to speak to these things, but I didn't know anybody else there or where they came from. And I knew that it might be easier for me to speak up first, and that perhaps then maybe it might put other people at ease. Or at least I hope so. So, I'm also a person, like I said, I didn't go to sit on my hands. So I personally feel better when I'm involved than when I'm just silently sitting there in my own head. So, if you saw me jumping in right away, that's why. On this particular prompt, I pretty much felt like I got to say what I wanted to say. I believe I did actually make that point that in either case, we were being raised in a narcissistic environment, one more overt, one more covert. And that was a point I wish had been left in the episode, because I think it helps people frame as they try to compare and contrast these groups if they choose to do so. But let's go ahead and move on to the prompt that I personally heard the most about because of my reaction. The next prompt on the episode you saw, though I don't believe the prompts were in order in the finished product, that perhaps we went through them when we were in studio. But the next prompt was, my former religion cost me relationships that I still mourn today. Now, I have to say that although it is definitely a pressure cooker to be upfront talking in that environment, it's also very daunting to be the lone disagreeer standing in the back by yourself in the spotlight, not knowing where the conversation around these somewhat generic prompts will go, and the depth of the topic and how that will be discussed, and where they might, go ahead and go over something that you were thinking that you might say. Between my ADHD, which makes it hard to stand still, and my back issues that were only made worse by the horrible stools that they have everybody there sitting on, stools that squeak and that you have to try not to make a noise in because you're wearing this microphone and you don't want it to be picked up. It was kind of hard to be the lone person standing in the back just listening. Also, they're talking away from me, so it wasn't as easy to hear back there. So that made for a very interesting experience, standing in the back, being the weirdo looming over everyone else who was sitting in the 8 chairs up front, minus mine, which was empty. That was a very interesting experience itself, just that moment. Now, if you watch that moment, you see me start to walk up, and then all of a sudden it cuts and you hear me talking, and then I'm sitting there. What you don't see is what I originally said when I came up. But I believe I said something about how I'm not some unfeeling person, but I've already grieved the loss of my family, and I've already done my mourning. Now, we could talk about the nature of grief, how it's a process that you get better at managing as it travels with you throughout life, but it never really goes away. And I'll say now that I do occasionally still have feelings about my family, of course, though they're more about wishing that I had one than wanting the one that I had. So, although it kind of portrayed me as coming in hot, that's not how I originally approached it. But I certainly said what I said, and I meant it. And I appreciate what they did leave in from what I was able to bring up. Person after person that knows me, whether you know me personally or you work with me in my coaching practice, you know that I do not promote chasing after emotionally unavailable people. One of the biggest sources of continued pain in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community is the inability to accept who our parents and others that we valued really are. Not just today, but who they always likely were. They're just not able to love. They don't know what love is, and therefore they cannot give it. There's something in the way, both the doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses, but also the broken parts of them. And unless and until they leave the cult, they can't even begin to heal themselves or the relationships with their kids or others that they participated in breaking. They have to leave that thing and to demonstrate real change and to reach out for help in real ways, or it will just be more of the same pain that we already feel from them. Moving on to the next prompt, and I really wish we had had more time when we originally discussed it, but the prompt was, my former religion protects abusers. I thought that everyone did a really good job of relating how their groups protected the predators among them with regard to CSA and such. But I was also sitting there chomping at the bit because although that's the abuse that attracts headlines, there's so much more abuse at stake. Contrary to what was said by one person in the cult, most people in Jehovah's Witnesses are not actually sexually abused, but everyone in the cult has experienced the mental and emotional abuse at a minimum. And, you know, whether it's around the topic of sex and sexuality, which came up in another prompt, or just the mental and emotional and religious abuse that we all suffered. You know, I get a lot of people that say to me that they'd like to share their story here on the Sean podcast, but maybe they don't think that their story is, you know, quote, enough. But all stories matter, and so do all abuses. Every one of us was abused mentally and emotionally and spiritually at that minimum I referenced. It's baked into the system and those that follow it. That's enough right there. That's a form of abuse that I think everyone could likely relate to, and that I wish we could have talked about because it may be the most insidious as it's overshadowed by these other things. But it's just as serious and has just as real consequences as any other type of abuse. Many other people had parents that were beating the fire out of them. You know, so many people were hit with objects, at times until they bled, sometimes in all-out brawls with parents that were just truly awful over who commented at a meeting or who didn't. You know, some people's parents were creative and made them kneel on rice, like torture tactics to inflict pain. Jehovah's Witnesses also have a really bad habit of protecting domestic abusers, not their victims. There are so many stories of people that went to the elders for protection that were told to keep enduring it. And perhaps someday they might win over their spouse without a word through their fine conduct. You know what I'm talking about, those scriptures they use. Now, I'm not sure, but I'll never forget what at least I remember, accurate or not, about a sister and her two daughters that my mom got close to when I was a child when we first attended meetings. When she was murdered by her husband, I believe I overheard discussions about how he beat her. But Jehovah hates a divorcing, right? And the pressure to stay is very real, only fueling the fire and adding to the isolation. Now, obviously, not every case is going to end in something so harsh and final. But there are so many stories out there of people that went to the elders for help and were turned away. There are people that were discouraged from leaving that abusive spouse, from reporting it to the police for fear of bringing reproach upon Jehovah's name. So in addition to the sexual abuse that gets talked about so much, there was so much other abuse as well that impacted even more lives. I could go on as well to talk about the financial abuse, the withholding of educational opportunities. The educational abuse is rife inside Jehovah's Witnesses. The whole place is designed to hold you down, to keep you distrustful of other people and yourself, so that you have to keep looking to them to figure out which way is up, which way is down for direction in your daily life. It's a feature, not a bug. The system itself is abusive, and it becomes a haven for abuse. You can't control people that you let up off the mat. You can't control people that you encourage to love themselves. You can't control people that you actually support as they find their own way in life. And those are some of the things I wish we really could have talked about, because again, CSA, a huge source of pain inside the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology as well. But I think that there's a lot more abuse that we could have talked about that everyone was going through, to add that as well, because I think that might have helped a lot of people feel validated there too. And it's just all, again, part of the whole feature set of the system of control that they use. And it's a damn shame. The next prompt was, my former religion had some good intentions. This one struck me because I really appreciated that they left in the beginning of that part of the discussion. It was very real. You hear the producer introduce the prompt as stated, but once people move up, she then tried to clarify it to mean that the religion had more good intent than bad. And then you see people that were moving up suddenly turn around and drop back. I too started to drop back. And then Mackenzie said she didn't want to be the only one up there. And I believe that I said, I got this, and sat down too. I could argue it different ways, but I think it's important to realize, especially in our healing process, as it's something that we talk about a lot when I work with people professionally, and that is that intent matters. It's certainly not the only thing that matters, but most people that come to us are coming to us in these interactions with their past history, their present day circumstances, their base psychology, their base biology, and the mental and emotional tools that they were exposed to, for better or for worse, that they picked up and that are now on display. Even a well-meaning person can approach things in a terrible way based on any of those things I just mentioned. So there's a lot of nuance, and the human condition is far more complex than we sometimes wish it to be with easy labels. I have to say that personally, I can be rather word literal at times, and I found the prompts to be a bit vague. I found during casting that questions I were asked weren't always easily applicable, and that I had to do a lot of explaining to explain kind of what the situation was so that then I could even provide an answer. And, perhaps sometimes those prompts are purposefully vague, so as to spark discussion. Let's see where people go. But, I'll just let the discussion that you saw stand for what I feel, and others as well. I thought they did a good job in editing that whole thing and choosing what to leave in. And I thought that prompt in particular was just very well edited, because they showed a little of the very real and very messy parts of even the discussion that was being had on Jubilee in the moment. The next prompt was one that I didn't see coming, and I wish we had had more time to talk about it, and I'm going to today. And that prompt was, sexual shame still affects me today. Now, I personally wished we had a lot more time for that discussion. We touched on some high points, how the shame around sexuality that is pushed by the sex-obsessed discussions of Jehovah's Witnesses really impact people. But I wanted to make a specific point that I really didn't get to make while we were there. Again, I talk with a lot of people in my day-to-day professional coaching practice, and many things come up over time. And I think that I moved up as an agreeer in this situation, the old married guy of the group, a white cis heterosexual male, hoping to talk a bit about something that maybe people don't think about much, from my own experience and from those that I've talked to throughout the years. You know, this is another topic that we often broach in one particular way. In this case, often through the LGBTQIA plus lens, which is obvious because those poor individuals weren't just repressed, they were canceled altogether. We hetero folks were certainly repressed and discouraged, but at least we had the chance to express ourselves sexually or to partner up. They didn't. So I want to acknowledge up front that was the case. And, you know, we had people on the panel representing that side of humanity. But if you're a heterosexual couple, and in the cult, we're going to say husband and wife, because that's the only way anyone is even supposed to start exploring their sexuality. You didn't grow up in a normal and healthy way sexually. None of us did. Self-exploration was condemned. Normal rites of passage, like just dating as a kid, were not allowed. I work with so many people that never got their little hearts broken when they were kids, never got to go through the ups and downs of even silly elementary school crushes. And they got married young, and they come to work with me, and they might be in the midst of the dissolution of the only relationship that they've ever known, faced with a world of dating on the outside that they never got a chance to grow into. It's devastating and completely overwhelming for people. There's a show on Netflix that I liked called Sex Education, a fictional story about kids exploring relationships and sexuality at ages that kids might typically do so. I personally like the show. I found the characters compelling, but also it portrays the real and awkward ways that everyone feels about the topic being explored with a measure of emotional intelligence. We didn't get to explore and figure out who we were and what we wanted out of that aspect of our lives and our individual being, how we might express ourselves differently with different partners. So our experience was not quite, it might have been normal for us as Jehovah's Witnesses, but it wasn't necessarily quote unquote normal. I remember having a moment somewhere in my early 40s where it struck me that I always said I didn't want kids, but was it because I truly don't want kids, never wanted kids? Or was it because I was a good rule-following Jehovah's Witness that was discouraged from having children so close to the end? You know, I didn't want to be burdened by my little progeny going throughout the Great Tribulation and stuff. Why have kids now? You can have in a new system, right? I explored that topic and I determined that I don't want and never wanted kids. That's fair. Never dreamed of having them in a new system. Just never had an interest beyond enjoying and playing with kids and then handing them back over conveniently to their parents. I care about kids deeply, but I'm just not one that has ever had a real desire to be a parent. But here lies the rub. I can't know for sure who I would be had I not been exposed to the cult. That's a bell that can't be unrung. I can heal from it, but I can't know what my desires might have been without it. I can know who I am today, but not who I would have been otherwise. And it would be naive of me to think that growing up Jehovah's Witness doesn't impact who I am as a sexual person today. It doesn't mean that I'm unhappy today with my sexuality or my lack of desire to have children of my own, just as another example of this. But it does mean that it likely impacts me in some ways because I was molded by it too. None of us can know what our interest might be had we never come into contact with Jehovah's Witnesses. We can't know that in any aspect of life, sexually or otherwise. I wish I could have talked about that more because I think it's more universal. And I don't think it gets talked about as much because the hetero folks were, again, allowed to express their sexuality. But again, just like I can't know for sure if I would have wanted kids or not if I had never been exposed to that thing. And it would be naive of me to assume that it didn't impact me to some degree. Or maybe if I had grown up with a super healthy family where kids were, I don't know, appreciated by parents, or where I felt loved and safe and things like that, maybe that would have impacted, and maybe I would have said, oh, I want to have kids and I want to provide them what I had too. But I didn't have those things. And so I can't know. And it's the same thing sexually. We know what we know, and it's fair too. We don't need to know who else we could be. There's something to be said for being happy with who we are, right? And we don't have to explore all the possibilities, but we should be free to if we want to. And we never had that freedom because of the group that we grew up in, and because of the extremely repressive, sex negative nature of the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses. So now let's get to the prompt where I never got to open my mouth. I never got to say anything. I'm sure some of you are just fine with that, and that's fine too. But I didn't get to say anything on the last prompt. I remember watching everybody kind of going around talking. It was interestingly kind of one by one, almost in an order. And I thought, hey, we're almost to me and I'll get to say something. And that time never came. It's just kind of like, oh, hey, let's go ahead and wrap up. So I'm going to take my opportunity now. And that last prompt was, I would never let my child join the religion that I left. Now, I don't have kids, but I would never let my children join the religion. To be honest, I would never allow them to be around anyone consciously that is in the cult. Period. Full stop. Not as children. And I know that sounds harsh, but I'm going to tell you why. Liz on the side over, sitting across from me, the ex-Scientologist, beautifully and I believe tearfully said that she left everything so that her children would never have to be prey for Scientology. She touched on the point I wanted to make. Jehovah's Witnesses are spiritual predators. I'm not saying that they don't think they have good motives. See the earlier prompt. But what I'm saying is that they are opportunists. They are taught to find hurting people and to bring them into the fold at any cost. I have worked with hundreds of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses over the last 6 years in my coaching practice. I have interviewed hundreds on my channel here. I once ran a Facebook support group with a couple thousand people in it. I've been on various forums and subreddits and Facebook groups over the last decade of my freedom from Jehovah's Witnesses, immersing myself and helping wherever I can. And I've read the stories. I've looked into the eyes of parents that lost their children to Jehovah's Witnesses because their own parents shamed them into giving them up. I've been told firsthand stories of people who had grandparents that were bribing their children to get them to go to meetings behind their parents' backs, promising them things like cars if they would do so. I once knew somebody that raised her kid to the age of 18, and that child then opted to go live with the JW aunt and uncle because they had been brainwashing that kid behind her mom's back for years. I've known of Jehovah's Witnesses to get around boundaries set by parents by reaching out when the parents aren't home, or to send literature placed inside gifts, or reaching out through gaming consoles or Messenger, or any way they can get at the children. If that's not the behavior of a predator, I don't know what is. Surreptitiously skirting the boundaries set by the parents of the children, to talk to the children, grooming children to not be honest with their parents, that is so dangerous. If it was anyone else, we would immediately protect our kids. But we've been taught to make excuses for Jehovah's Witnesses, and especially for our parents, for their bad behavior. Many years ago, I had a guy reach out to me because his daughter befriended a young Jehovah's Witness girl at school. He wanted to kick around ideas with me on how he could protect his kid. I went back and forth with him through email, And his own daughter was already changing the way she talked because her little JW friend at school was controlling her speech. Now, I can't remember if it was the same person or another, but so often the non-Jehovah's Witness kid can only be friends with the Jehovah's Witness kid if they go to the Kingdom Hall first, and then the kid might be able to play together after the meeting. The Jehovah's Witness parents in that case are literally preying on the children of people on the outside. How does that not sound predatory? We just went through the holidays. How many grown-ass adults in offices around the world are tiptoeing around the Jehovah's Witnesses in their midst? It's somebody's birthday and they're showing up on ExJW groups asking how they can include the witness or not offend them. Many of you listening to this right now may still have Jehovah's Witnesses in your life that you're afraid of upsetting, so you don't post things on Facebook, or you furiously hide your holiday decorations or entertainment media whenever the Jehovah's Witnesses in your life come over to your house. Your house. You change for them. You alter yourself. So there's not one fucking chance that I would ever allow my child to be around predators that hold so much power they can make grown adults do things they don't want to do. What chance would my child have? They can be just fine without grandparents that are predators. They can be just fine without friends or aunts or uncles or whatever that are going to prey on them. Even if those predators think that they're saving them and think that they've got nothing but love in their hearts as motivation. How well did being around those people work out for you? Were they the wind beneath your wings or the anchor dragging you to the bottom? Did they validate who you were or did they invalidate you? Are your thoughts and feelings safe around them? How many tears have you cried over their treatment of you? And in some situations, Jehovah's Witness grandparents have the unmitigated audacity to want to see their grandkids by having them dropped off at their house while the parent is shunned and sits out in the car or leaves. What does that teach your children? Do you want all of that for your kids just so they can call somebody Nana or Pop Pop? There is just no way I could ever allow my child that I love, that I'm entrusted with protecting, around someone that stole my childhood. Full stop. Now, I want to say at the end of that little rant that I am not condemning people for doing so. I understand the pull. And I understand that it's not always so black and white. It's not always so easy. As far as, you know, not everyone is having kids. Sometimes they're having kids and they are witnesses at the time, and the witnesses are already around their kids. And, you know, do you detach the children instantly or whatever? These are topics that come up in my coaching practice. And I understand it's not always that simple, but the prompt was laid out to me. And so I'm answering it from my perspective with my life circumstances. And I understand that other people may have their own feelings. Everyone has, some people are going to bristle at me calling them predators and such, because we were once one of them, right? But I was kind of predatory. So were probably you. We were kind of taught that. We went to the theocratic ministry school. We were taught to look for people's pain points and then to seize upon them in the ministry. Like, that's just kind of how we were taught to move throughout the world as salespeople for this multi-level marketing religious group that we were a part of, this publishing house of sorts. But people there are willing, again, all the way back at the beginning, I talked about how people are willing to die for that thing. And, again, that's the ultimate price for being around a cult. And I think that if you are in a situation, you do have to really seriously consider the questions that I asked and think about those things in your own life and how your parents impacted you, or whoever it is that you're allowing your kid around, or, in any aspect of your life. Change the name to Scientology. Let's say that your parents were Scientologists. Nana and Pop are Scientologists. You letting your kids around them? Or let's say that their friend at school is a Scientologist. Can let your kid hang around them? Or maybe we come up with another name, but there's probably some name out there that sparks the seriousness in your own mind when it comes to these things. But again, we were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think they do a good job of trying to control the narrative about them. And you hear so many people, I kind of came up with a term. It's my own term, but there's PMO, POMI, POMO. What did I not say? Anyway, PMI. And that stands for physically in, mentally in, being in the cult, or physically in but mentally out for people stuck in who can't leave. I'm fully POMO, physically out, mentally out. There are people who are POMI, physically out but mentally still attached to this thing and still believe it. And I think that there should also be POME, physically out making excuses. And those excuses are made not necessarily for the doctrine. A lot of people don't believe the doctrine, but they make excuses for the bad behavior of Jehovah's Witnesses. And fair, everybody can feel how they feel. But when kids are involved, please be wary. What I said was very real as far as the examples I know of people losing their kids to this. And is it worth it? I just ask, is it worth it? I don't know. It's a scary thing. We're so protective of our kids and what lotions they use because it might have some byproduct in it, or what food they eat because it might be unhealthy. We've got some pretty obviously unhealthy people in a lot of our lives, and I think that we really need to think long and hard about that. Now, my goal, or what I was hoping I would get the chance to do, is to end the original recording by thanking the ex-Scientology activists. Not just those who showed up on the panel, but also people like Leah Remini or Mike Render, rest in peace. Just all of the content that was out there that helped so many Jehovah's Witnesses to at least start their journey to becoming ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Obviously, Leah included that one episode of her show, Scientology, The Aftermath. She had that one episode where she allowed ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to share their stories. I mean, what an amazing thing to do. What a cool thing to do, to turn your platform over to an entirely different group, to allow them to have a say because they were being hurt too. And so I think there's a great kinship among the two groups, at least from certain generations that experienced those particular pieces of content. But I think that those stories of Scientology are great for someone waking up from Jehovah's Witnesses because they're not a Christian religion. And you can see the control without any cognitive dissonance regarding the teachings themselves because they're so outside of the JW reality. They're not hearing scriptures and saying, oh, but the Bible says this, because they've been programmed to. They're just listening to the stories, the personal lived experiences. And I think that can be very helpful. And it clearly already has. I've personally met many people who woke up around that time because of that show, or it helped expedite their waking process. Now, there were a lot of people in the comments who expressed disappointment that it wasn't active Jehovah's Witnesses versus ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and the same with Scientology. If you watch Jubilee, do you think they didn't try to get that on their channel? I mean, they thrive on controversy, people surrounded at times with opposing viewpoints in fiery, heated discussions. This was originally labeled a versus episode because they like that kind of dialogue. Personally, I enjoyed the episode that was Mormons versus ex-Mormons, as the Mormons on there kind of played a lot of the same games that you see Jehovah's Witnesses play when you try to get real with them. But of course, they put out the call to try to get the JW version of that Mormon episode, and likewise with Scientology. Ultimately, I have to say the biggest thank you to Jubilee, because you gave us two groups of X's your platform on which to use our voices. Jubilee could have silenced us too, just because they wouldn't speak, just because they don't want to. And I think I think I said earlier, when I looked today, there's like 458,000 plus people who viewed this episode. That's, I assume it'll probably get to 500 at some point at least. That's 500,000 people that have been exposed to something that they otherwise would never have perhaps had the chance to do otherwise. So again, a heartfelt and sincere thank you to Jubilee for giving us the opportunity to speak, because we come from a place that has tried to rob us of our voice, and we've had to fight tooth and nail to get our voices out there, or to be able to use it ourselves just to leave that mess. So, I just want to thank Jubilee again for that opportunity very sincerely. I hope this discussion was fun for you on some level, perhaps a bit educational in some form or fashion. Jenny and I had our 25th anniversary last year. Our plans for our 20th anniversary were ruined by COVID, our anniversary being in March of 2020. Not a great time to be going somewhere for one's anniversary. And we were planning a cross-country road trip for the fall so that we could celebrate our 25th anniversary, but we also wanted to incorporate our 10th shuniversary, which was September the 2nd, because the fall is a time we like anyway. We both hate the heat. We love seeing the colors when the trees change and everything. So our original plan was to do a cross-country trip in the fall of 2025. But then I got an email and the opportunity came up to do this for Jubilee, and I absolutely jumped at the chance. It was a very expensive journey on my own dime. It was very tiring. It was weeks away from our respective self-employed businesses. I purchased a 20-year-old Toyota Highlander to do this trip in, and drove across the country because we needed something more comfortable than our other cars. It did really well, except for an alternator issue that cost us big money because we had to replace the alternator twice on the trip, only to get home and find out that it was never the alternator. There's a wiring harness. I figured it out and then fixed it. There's a wiring harness that actually reads the voltage that controls the light that appears on your dash that says, hey, the charge system is screaming here. And realized that the connector inside the wiring harness had gone bad. And so about a 10-cent piece of wire, snip the wire on both sides, create a jumper, solder it in, heat shrink it. And it was about a 10-cent fix for something that I probably spent, oh my God, I don't really want to think about it, but I probably spent about $1,500 trying to fix on the road in these places. I've got a new alternator though. I didn't need one, but I've got one. Because the first one didn't fix it and I had to buy a second one. So it was quite an adventure. It was wild. I mean, I drove for 84 hours because I'm a terrible passenger. I get motion sickness very easily. And so I can't look at maps. I can't direct anything. I can't be any help. I can't even look at my phone or do anything in the passenger seats. So I did all the driving, but it was just an amazing trip. We drove from Indiana to Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, then up to Canoga Park, just past LA. And then we went up the coast and we saw the SEALs and the Pacific Coast Highway. And we went to Bakersfield and met an ex-Jehovah's Witness there. And that was really cool. Had a great time with him and his partner at the time. And we drove to, we got to hike in the desert and we got to see the sequoias, and then we stayed in Moab, Utah on the way home because we came back, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. And so we got to see the Rockies in Colorado, which was amazing, and drove through them. We got to see, I mean, the highlight of the trip, or one of them, was the Red Rocks and everything in Utah. Going to Canyonlands near Moab was just an absolute treat. And I so need to go back there and to explore those red rocks and those canyons and those arches and the desert and all the things that look completely different than anything that we have here in southern Indiana. And it was just an absolutely amazing experience, only capped off by this opportunity to also do this with Jubilee and to meet the other really cool people who were on it. And I was just very grateful to have that opportunity. And for those who don't know, last year, Jenny went through some health issues and ended up diagnosed with Graves' disease, which is autoimmune. And in November had to have her thyroid removed. And it's just been because there's thyroid eye disease and just complication after complication. And so 2025 was interesting because it was honestly one of the harder years of my life, with just a lot of personal things that were going on, just things breaking and being expensive. It was a very expensive year. And Jenny, her health issues, and that added to the expense, and just concern for her, and not being able to do some of the things we normally like to do, as her body was either wasting away because her thyroid was too amped up, and now she's hypothyroid because she literally has no thyroid. And so it's just been this wild swing of everything, and lots of work missed on her part and such. Just a wild year. But I'm so happy that in the middle of the year, between both of our birthdays in July and August, between our shoniversary and our anniversary, was this. And I'll never forget this whole experience. So I'm going to leave it at that. If there's any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll either address them there or do another video, or if I don't have time, or the question I feel has been answered, I may not. But also, if you could do me a favor and consider supporting the channel whenever you're here with a like, a comment, even if it's just saying hi or telling my guest how much you appreciate them sharing. And of course, subscribing, that would really help. 2025, in 2024, there was an adjustment to the algorithm, and my channel really got crushed to some degree. And it's, it's unfortunate. I'd like to get these stories out to more and more people. And in order to do so, we need engagement. We need likes. We need comments. We need participation. And I'm going to have to try to rebuild it in certain ways based on that algorithm change. And I don't know. I may have to change some things, tweak some things. We'll see. I'm not an expert on all this, and I'm a one-man band doing his best. But the algorithm has really hurt the channel, and so I need you to show that you care, if you do so, more than ever, so that we can keep this thing going. Because it's just, go figure algorithms and the powers that be and how things are affected. And I know it's not all just the algorithm. There was also an issue with the song that I used to use, and I got a strike on that, or a copyright challenge on like 10 episodes, or maybe it was like 15. I challenged 5 of those and won because I had purchased the rights to that song and spent hundreds of dollars on it. And then they changed the rules and came after me, which was just absolutely insane. But there was still, I challenged 5 and won. There were still apparently like 10 that were hanging out there that were unaddressed. And I figured they would take away all of the issue, but they didn't. So I had to go back and redo that. So there's just a lot of things behind the scenes of this channel itself that people don't realize, not to mention the behind the scenes of Jubilee. But in the end, 2026 is here. I'm gonna keep doing what I do. I love the people that I work with in my coaching practice. I love the people that I get to interview and get to know through this process. and I loved getting to do this. So I wish everybody a happy 2026. I hope everybody gets off to a good start. Be kind to yourself. What does that used to say? Love yourself and others, do no harm, and go be happy. So take care, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to tell your story on the podcast, buy merch, or get more information, go to shunnedpodcast.com.